Good morning. It is so wonderful to see all of you here today. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lynn Conrad Marvette, and I'm the Director of Development at MOHI. When you think of MOHI, hopefully you think about history and industry. It's in our title, the Museum of History and Industry. But do you think about innovation? We want you to. Today's event celebrates Seattle's distinct role as an innovation hub. And just look at this neighborhood. This is the neighborhood where the Duwamish people chose to settle. And our current neighbors include folks like the Allen Institute for Brain Science, the Gates Foundation, Fred Hutch, PATH, Amazon, Mad Art, the University of Washington, Zymogenetics, and that's just to name a few. We also have representatives with us today from the space industry, from Boeing, where we have the, right above your heads, don't worry, it's safe, the first Boeing float plane ever built. We have folks from Starbucks and the construction industry. And Seattle's also known for the gaming industry. I could go on, but in my mind, this indicates just how innovative this region is. And frankly, this innovation has changed the world. We are surrounded by stories of distinguished visionaries. And here at MOHI, we have oral histories, displays, and artifacts that help deepen our understanding of these stories. So the question is, whose story will be next? Now, why is it that this corner of the world has such an enormous impact? What are the objects and narratives from the past that delight, disturb, and inspire us? These questions have led MOHI to create the Bezos Center for Innovation. If you've never had the opportunity to explore it, and I have talked to a few of you today, and I know this is your first time here, so please take a moment after the program and explore this region of the museum, which is the Bezos Center for Innovation. I think you'll learn a thing or two. For example, the Idea Lab, that's over to the side here, is a place where visitors of all ages can sketch their ideas and leave them for display here at MOHI. The other thing that we do here at MOHI is provide fantastic educational programs for kids. And for me, there's nothing quite like being in this space that we call our atrium and seeing kids actively engaged in learning about history. We foster the development of 21st century skills, such as communication and collaboration. And today, we will ask you to demonstrate your commitment to educational programming. Later in our program, you will hear from a MOHI trustee, Enrique Gonzalez, and he'll tell you why he believes your financial support matters. And now, I would like to say thank you to our generous corporate sponsors, J.P. Morgan Chase & Company, the Boeing Company, and Foster Pepper. And thank you, too, to our generous table sponsors and our in-kind supporters. And now I would like to acknowledge just a few of our special guests who are here today. We have the Consul General of Mexico, Eduardo Baca. And I didn't get a chance to meet him, but I believe we have Matt Eisenhower, who's representing Senator Patty Murray's office with us today. So thank you, Matt. I'd also like to thank MOHI's board president, Chuck Nordhoff. And all of our MOHI trustees and former trustees who have joined us today. Today's theme of innovation and diversity reminds me of a quote from an African-American woman named Catherine Phillips, who happens to serve as the Senior Vice Dean at Columbia Business School. And she's actually done decades of research on this topic of innovation and diversity. And she says, If you want to build teams or organizations capable of innovating, you need diversity. Diversity enhances creativity. It encourages us to search for novel information and perspectives, leading to better decision-making and problem-solving. Even simply being exposed to diversity can change the way you think, end quote. So, in other words, I think diversity propels innovation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our wonderful Executive Director at MOHI, Leonard Garfield, to say a few words. Leonard?
Okay, well, thank you, Lynn, and thank you, everyone, for being up so early. I like, though, having breakfast at this time of year, because when you get up, it doesn't seem like you're waking up in the middle of the night, so this is very, very cool. This morning, as Lynn said, we are here to celebrate innovation and history. And for me, it is probably my favorite event of the year, because for a historian to actually get to talk to someone who is making history, like Nick Hanauer is making history, is a special treat. Nick is one of the most influential and provocative voices in our community of innovators, but he's a relatively new voice in a very long tradition of risk takers and disruptors and collaborators who collectively have made up this amazing history that Lynn has been talking about. And she's right, that plane up there, the very first commercial plane ever built. But that's not the only thing. You'll see the first heart defibrillator here. You'll see the first kidney dialysis machine, the first generation Kindle, the first Starbucks sign, the portable vaccine device that the Gates Foundation is taking to the third world right now. That's history that's being made right now. And that's here at MOHI. Not so long ago, those made in Seattle innovations seemed implausible. Today, we know they're indispensable. That's an amazing story. And that's the story that we share with young people, because more amazing than those artifacts are the moments of learning that take place here every single day. When young students come, they discover those stories, and they have that aha moment that reminds them that they are also innovators. They're part of that tradition. And then the spark is lit, and the student begins to imagine where they are going to take us next. Before this school year is out, this month actually, over 35,000 young people and their teachers will have explored the history of innovation here at MOHI, and they'll begin to dream of our collective future. Our innovation classroom program is scaling up to reach some of the most diverse neighborhoods in our region. Our teen program has been just awarded the best of its kind in the state. And over the next few months, we'll be engaging young people in innovation summer camp, in coding workshops, in maker days, and in much more. And as those young people explore that history, they'll begin to shape our future. Nick Hanauer is also thinking very carefully and very deeply about our future. Nick is an entrepreneur, he's a venture capitalist, he's a civic activist, he's a writer, he's an author, and he may be the only person in America who can wear all those titles with equal aplomb. He is amazing, in a word. Nick co-founded the venture capital firm Second Avenue Partners, and he's been on the ground floor or the cutting edge of the innovation economy for years, managing, founding, financing over 30 companies, and it's a list whose names you recognize beginning with the A's, with Amazon and Aquantive, and it goes all the way to the end of the alphabet. Nick is also, according to his official biography, these are his words, not mine, a troublemaker. And to that end, he founded Civic Ventures and the Civic Skunkworks blog that accompanies that, a group of innovators like Nick who are devoted to ideas, policies, and actions that catalyze significant social change. Along those lines, Nick is a staunch advocate for public education, and he co-founded the League of Education Voters. He cares about the health and safety of our communities and founded the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, which just this week had their annual luncheon and sold out the Westin. That's how much Nick is reaching people. He believes that economic inequality threatens our very democracy, and his writings on that topic and his famous TED Talk have gone viral. Nick also works with his wife Leslie to manage the Nick and Leslie Hanauer Foundation, which is focused on issues of public education and the environment. He is the co-author of The True Patriot and Gardens of Democracy, which I encourage you to read. Never one to shy away from controversy, Nick Hanauer truly walks his talk. And to talk this morning about diversity and innovation, it is my great pleasure to welcome Nick Hanauer.
Good morning. Yikes, what a nice introduction. Well, I'm super pleased to be here with you today. I can't think of a more appropriate place to talk about innovation and diversity than at MoHi, the centerpiece of Seattle's South Lake Union tech redevelopment. Our region has long been shaped by innovation, from Boeing to Microsoft and to the sprawling Amazon campus that's growing up just behind us. But our knack for innovation extends far beyond that to other sectors like Costco, that pioneered the warehouse retail category, Nordstrom's, which redefined what consumers expect from a high-end retailer, and Starbucks, which changed the way that people drink coffee. And I would argue things like the $15 minimum wage, passed first in SeaTac and then in Seattle, have redefined our understanding of how a 21st century technological economy really works. My own work on the $15 minimum wage has been deeply informed by collaboration with some of the smartest economic thinkers in the world, the people who are pushing far beyond the boundaries of orthodox economic thinking. And today I'd like to share with you some of the insights from that thinking and those collaborations. I apologize for the wonkiness of my talk this morning, but here's the headline: everything you learned in Econ 101 is wrong. For the past century, the economic textbooks have painted a narrow and mechanistic view of how capitalism works, focused on the supposed role of markets, prices, and rational, self-interested buyers and sellers in efficiently allocating resources. You are familiar with the drill: sellers maximize profits, buyers maximize utility, prices are set, the market is cleared, and resources are allocated in a socially optimal way. And driving this allegedly natural and self-regulating process is capital, the defining feature of market capitalism. Indeed, the central argument of the orthodoxy that has guided our economic policies for the last 40 years is that it is the wealth of the wealthy and the profits of corporations, the concentrated accumulation of capital, that is the indispensable prerequisite for growth and prosperity. The rich are job creators. The more money they have, and the less constrained they are by regulation, the more jobs they create. A simple story, a persuasive story, a completely wrong story. That's because over this past several decades, most of the bedrock assumptions of neoclassical economics have unraveled. Behavioral economists have accumulated mountains of evidence showing that real human beings don't actually behave rationally. Empirical economists have identified anomalies suggesting that markets aren't actually efficient at all, and experimental economists have raised problematic questions about the very existence of utility. So humans aren't rational, markets aren't efficient, and there may actually be no such thing as utility. In fact, rather than the closed equilibrium system of the neoclassical model, we now know with scientific certainty that economies are actually complex, adaptive ecosystems that are characterized by the same kinds of feedback loops found in nature. That is why, for instance, minimum wage opponents are so wrong when they assert that if wages go up, employment must go down. On the contrary, the fundamental law of capitalism is ecosystemic. When workers have more money, businesses have more customers and need more workers. But the most fundamental flaw in the orthodox model is the previously unchallenged presumption that it is the accumulation of capital that drives our market economy. 200 years ago, at the dawn of the industrial age, this may have been more true, but in the 21st century, where the availability of capital and the cost of innovation have respectively risen and fallen exponentially, access to capital is no longer the primary constraint on market capitalism. Investors like me are already struggling to cope with what the Bain Company calls capital superabundance. Indeed, rather than investing their record profits in research, development, plants, equipment, and expansion, America's public company CEOs are now spending 54% of their profits, $700 billion a year, 4% of GDP, manipulating their own share prices through stock buybacks. I sit on the boards of some public companies, and I can tell you there is no shortage of capital available. What we lack is a sufficient supply of great ideas and demand. So if our 21st century technological economy has advanced to the stage where concentrated capital is no longer the dominant driver of growth, where does growth and prosperity actually come from today? And the answer is, it comes from you. In the technological economy of the 21st century, growth and prosperity is not created from capital accumulation, but through a virtuous cycle between innovation and demand. Innovation is the process through which we solve human problems. Consumer demand is the mechanism through which we distribute, incentivize, inform, and fund innovation. And it is economic inclusion, the full economic participation of as many people as possible, as innovators, entrepreneurs, workers, and consumers, that drives both innovation and demand. Think about it. Life isn't dramatically better today than it was in 1800 because we are allocating 19th century resources like horses and carriages more efficiently. Life is better today because people have effectively created motorized transport, life-saving antibiotics, indoor plumbing, the internet, and many other innovations. Life is better today because our economy has evolved new and better solutions to human problems, and innovation is quite literally an evolutionary process. Evolution is an algorithm for discovering adaptive solutions, and it operates on the economic world in much the same way as it does on the biological, by selecting for innovations that endow an advantage within the context of the current environment. Innovation is the process of creating new adaptions, and consumer demand is the process of selection. And just as in the biological world, diversity is the key to sustaining a robust and resilient economy. The more people we include in our economy, the more people are permitted to specialize. And the more specialized skills our society accumulates, the more knowledge it creates. It is through the recombination of specialized knowledge that new innovations evolve. And crucially, the more cognitively diverse the innovators, the more people simultaneously attacking a particular problem from as many different perspectives as possible, the faster and better our problems are solved. This is the very science of innovation. Innovation is driven by diversity, not sameness. Indeed, it is this ability to tolerate and leverage differences and diversity that is America's greatest global competitive advantage. We have the most diverse and therefore the most creative and innovative workforce on the planet. But a solution unconsumed is a problem unsolved, and so diversity is crucial to the selection process as well. When we as consumers choose to spend our money on products and services, we literally select one adaptation over another, iPhone over Android, for example, or a latte over drip coffee. The market responds by giving us more of what our consumer dollars say we want, while experimenting with new adaptations based on past selections. The economy thus evolves over time, with consumer demand driving innovation and technological and social innovation shaping consumer demand. And the more diverse the demand, the more dynamic the innovation process becomes, in a positive feedback loop benefiting both innovators and consumers. But wait, you might say, what about money? What about work? Quite simply, work is the process through which we instantiate potential solutions, while money is simply the medium through which we communicate information between sellers and buyers and innovators about which adaptations best solve human problems within the constraints of the current market. It is in this context that we understand diverse consumer demand, that is, selection, to be as much a part of the innovation process as innovation itself. It is only through consumer spending that businesses ultimately determine which innovations prove fit at solving consumer problems. For example, if Starbucks attempts to follow up on its popular, seasonally available pumpkin latte with a St. Patrick's Day themed potato latte, consumers would no doubt reject it. And Starbucks would never bring this disgusting innovation to market again. Consumers vote with their wallets, and businesses respond accordingly. On the other hand, given a sufficiently large, affluent, and diverse population of latte drinkers, who knows, perhaps even the potato latte might find a profitable niche. Diversity of demand selects for diversity of products and services. But if the latte market were to shrink, not because people no longer desired lattes, but because wages fell to the point where fewer Americans could afford the small luxury of a fancy espresso drink, then the selection, convenience, and potential quality of lattes would shrink with it. And for all Americans, even the well-to-do like me, Starbucks might respond to the smaller market by closing locations, meaning I might need to walk the extra block or two for my regular caffeine fix. Some menu items might disappear as smaller economies of scale make them unprofitable. Maybe even the pumpkin latte would disappear, sadly. And faced with less demand for espresso machines, espresso machine manufacturers might invest less in increasing the quality and efficiency of their product. Some critics might dismiss this imagined scenario as a mere demand-side argument, but that would miss the point. Under this scenario, the demand for espresso drinks is unchanged. It is only the ability of consumers to fulfill their demand that has been diminished. The problem, you really want a good cup of coffee, remains. The preferred solution, a shot of espresso, is still potentially available, because diminished income leaves the problem unsolved or inadequately solved by a $1 cup of drip coffee at the local McDonald's. The feedback loop between potential espresso drinkers and potential espresso makers is severed, and everybody, investors, workers, suppliers, and customers, suffer as a result. Buying stuff is how the market selects for the technological and social adaptations that best solve human problems. But when consumers lack the means to fulfill their wants, they lack the means to convey their wants, and thus Starbucks can never really know if their declining sales are due to changing consumer tastes or changing consumer circumstances. Every lost sale due to lack of means rather than lack of want is a lost opportunity for Starbucks to learn how to solve their customers' problems better. If the purpose of economics is to increase prosperity, and prosperity is the consumption of solutions to human problems, then the more people we fully include in our economy as innovators, as robust consumers, and crucially, the more diverse those people are, the faster our economy will grow. People innovate, people consume, and to borrow a phrase from President Lincoln, in a very real sense, our true economy is an economy of the people, by the people, and for the people. Thank you.
Nick, you talk about an innovation economy as being an economy of inclusion. What are some of the other strategies that this community can look at to build that inclusive economy?
Well, I mean, there are a million things, but if just to say it again, if prosperity in human societies is sort of, the sort of conventional orthodox way to look at prosperity in human societies is think about things like GDP or money. The more money we have, the more prosperous we'll be. And that's simply not true, and the way to prove that is that you could live in a society and have all the money in the world. You could be king or queen of the jungle and have a pile of whatever it was, beads as high as a house. But all those beads won't buy you air conditioning or antibiotics or a comfy bed. But even a working class American or European has access to those things which define prosperity, the good life. And what that teaches you is that really the best way to think about human prosperity is the accumulation and distribution of solutions to human problems, right? The stuff in aggregate that makes our lives, that improves our welfare. And if that's true, then innovation is the cornerstone of prosperity in human societies. And if innovation is the cornerstone of prosperity in human societies, then you want as much of it as possible. And what that means is that you have to generate a feedback loop between the innovators and the consumers. And the more, and you know, it's quite simple. The more people and the more diverse people you can include in both of those feedback loops, the better things get. So in our society, we have a variety of, we have a relatively inclusive society by historical standards, but really you can think of this principle of inclusion as the golden rule of economics, that everything you do to more robustly include more people in your society as innovators, as consumers, as workers, as civic participants, the better things get. And I want to underscore a point, which is that this is not something I'm postulating. This is something you can prove because in all of world history, and certainly today, the most accurate predictor of prosperity, stability, and security in a society is how inclusive it is. Yeah. Right? There's nothing that more likely will lead to prosperity is how many people get to robustly participate. And so, you know, just to blather on, you know, political participation, political inclusion is the cornerstone of all that, because without inclusive political systems, you can't build inclusive economic systems. So, you know, we have to pay people fairly. We have to invest in the infrastructure that allows people to participate. We have to have a political system that encourages people to vote, doesn't discourage people to vote, and so on and so forth.
Right. So. And just a quick follow-up question. A couple of years ago, you famously warned your fellow plutocrats, to borrow your phrase, that the pitchforks were coming. That was a few years ago. You and others are working hard to make a more inclusive economy. How's the pitchfork clock going? Are we closer to the pitchforks coming, or are we making some progress?
You know, I don't think there's any other way. You know, I think that the way in which the presidential election is unfolding cannot be interpreted any other way than the pitchforks are coming, right? Like, so, since 1980, 95% of the benefits of economic growth have accrued to the top 1% of Americans. And we have lived through, several decades, 40 years probably, of the instantiation of what I call trickle-down economics into policy. Trickle-down economics to me is tax cuts for the rich, deregulation for the powerful, and wage suppression for everybody else is a theory of growth. That if you do those things, the economy will grow. This is just a lie. There's absolutely no truth to these assertions whatsoever. But if you believe that's how you grow the economy, you instantiate policies that lead to that, and you end up with a circumstance like the one we have. And so we're watching, this. I don't know how else to put it, this shit show unfold.
We'll find some ways you can put that.
And if you lean left, you blame corporations, and you're tending towards Bernie Sanders. And if you're right, you blame immigrants, and you tend towards Donald Trump. And I disagree somewhat with the perspectives of the people on the far left and the far right, but their anger is valid. These people got screwed. They just did. And they're angry, they deserve to be angry, and if we do not quickly find a way to make the lives of the majority of our fellow Americans materially better quickly, this cycle will look tame and civilized compared to the next one, in my opinion. I I am very concerned.
Okay.
So
we have work to do is what I'm...
absolutely.
Nick, we wanted to give folks here this morning a chance to ask questions, and do we have any questions for Nick?
Thank you. Good morning, Nick. Thank you very much. Listening to your comments about an inclusive economy and diversity and knowing how you spend your life, it seems that you're identifying a convergence between important social changes and economic growth. And do you agree with that? Is there a convergence? Do you see a synergy between those? And is that something that's taking hold in our American mentality, or do we have a lot of work to do in that area? It's kind of a multi-part question, but the convergence between important social changes and economic
Yeah,
thriving.
so it's a good and complex question, and I will attempt to answer it. So if you accept the sort of traditional neoclassical ideas about what an economy is and how it works, it is possible, and I suppose we've all been in a circumstance where you could say a thing like, well, there's the economically right thing to do, and then there's the right thing to do, right? Is that, right? We say that, right? That's insane. That's completely insane to believe that you can have parallel universes where there is an economically right thing to do and sort of a morally right thing to do, because here's the thing, all an economy is, at the end of the day, is how human beings decide who gets what and why. It is a social and moral construct which instantiates our social and moral preferences about status, privileges, and power. The only point of having an economy is to improve the welfare of people. And this is why things like GDP, gross domestic product, are such a corrosive and inappropriate way for us to think about what the economy does and what the point is. Like, look, nobody opens up the paper, looks at the GDP statistics and says, yay, I must be doing better, right? Like, it's just not, like, the problem with GDP is just a measure of how much stuff we move around. It doesn't have anything to do with whether people's lives are being improved. And you know, I'm hard at work with a bunch of people around the world to try to redefine how we think about what economics is, because if you move from thinking about what economics is from outputs to outcomes, from how much stuff we burn or make to the degree to which we improve the lives of ourselves, our own families, and the families around us, if we conceptualize it as the accumulation of solutions to human problems, then everything we do in economic life is an expressly moral choice. Because there is a difference between a company that makes things that give people cancer and a company that makes things that cure cancer, even though in traditional economic terms, that the sales of these two companies are the same, it's equivalent. That's insane. That's just insane. You know, and so I believe that we, in order to make a more effective society and economy, we have to grapple with the way in which we currently conceptualize what we do and why we do it, and connect our economic life with our moral, with our, you know, sort of our moral perspectives. And by doing that, you end up with way more prosperity, way more harmony, and you know, none of the awful externalities that plague the way in which we operate our economy today. Does that come close? Okay, so
fascinating. We're going to get you back when you've laid out that whole theory. Let's see. I think we have a question there.
What role do you see higher education and the education system as a whole playing in this new economy? What changes do you want to see?
So if prosperity in human societies is the accumulation of solutions to human problems, and innovation is the way in which we solve those problems, education isn't a luxury that we put some money aside for if and when we have growth. Education turns out to be the very thing that permits and creates growth in a technological market economy. And so, you know, my strong view is that we have to massively overinvest in franchising and including people via our education systems if we want to have a competitive and high growth economy. That being said, there is this view, which is that the problem is we're just not educating enough people, and that is not true. The problem with our economy is not that not enough people have a Harvard degree, right? It would be awesome if everybody got to go to Harvard, but you could give everybody in the country a Harvard degree, but somebody is still going to be cleaning the rooms in the hotels, and someone is still going to be doing the home health care, and somebody is still going to be flipping the burgers, right? We cannot educate our way out of a low-wage economy, an exclusive economy, an economy where so many Americans are impoverished. But, you know, look, here's the thing, is that, you know, we have evolved an economy where, you know, like a huge percentage of people are in poverty today, working for giant profitable corporations, right? So, you know, a service worker today earning $8 an hour does not create less value than a manufacturing worker did 40 years ago or 50 years ago. They're not less well-trained. Their company isn't less profitable. The only difference is that the manufacturing worker had a union and negotiated a fair split of the value the enterprise created. You know, the service worker today doesn't, and as a consequence, they live in poverty, and the rest of us make up the difference in poverty programs. And so we need to both work hard and make sacrifices to make our education systems the best that they can possibly be, while simultaneously acknowledging that you cannot educate your way out of radical and growing economic inequality, right? The two things are orthogonal. One will not solve the other. And I think that that's a very important point, so.
That's good. Let's see, I think we have time for a few more. How about right here?
Yeah, I'm interested in maybe this is going back to classical economics, but if you keep raising the
We might have to repeat
labor costs, larger companies do introduce more automation that ultimately results in fewer jobs. I'm sort of interested in your perspective on the new economy and this fear that it's going to result in fewer overall jobs.
Yeah, so probably you couldn't hear that question, but it's like higher labor costs creates, you know, incentivizes automation, and what are we going to do about that? And that's a very live issue. I think it's a very important one to confront. The first is, yay, because you know, human societies are made better through productivity improvements, and as a capitalist, I want as much productivity as possible. And low wages basically incent companies not to invest in productivity, right? Low wages are a reason for companies to both not invest capital in making the economy more productive, nor investing in the people themselves to train them more to make them productive. And as you may have read, our productivity numbers in the economy are falling, and my belief is that this is a very big part of it, is, you know, like, look, the Old South was not very productive. Why not? Because they had slaves, right? Why would you invest in a machine if you have slaves? Well, you know, the modern service economy basically has wage slaves. Why invest? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that this more generalized fear about, oh, the robots are going to take our jobs. And so it's important to remember that it wasn't that long ago that people dug holes with their fingernails, right? And then along came some smart person with a stick and put all those people out of business, and there was like a lot of commotion over that. And then some even smarter people came along with a shovel and put the people who dug with sticks out of business, and that was very tumultuous. But today, one person with one machine can dig as many holes as 10,000 people could in the day, right? And there's a couple of really amazing things about that. The first is that we employ more people in aggregate digging holes today with that machine than we did by 1,000-fold than we did in the day when people dug with their fingernails. The people digging the holes are far better off, and the holes are better, right? So that process of productivity and innovation has been one that served society, I would argue, very, very well. And we want as much of that as possible, but we also have to be cognizant of the disruptions that innovation creates and get in front of the social and political disruptions that those innovations create by finding ways to change what people do. Like, that's the problem isn't innovation and automation. The problem is having a political system that puts its head in the sand and pretends like that's not going to be disruptive. It's stupid, right? Like, obviously. And so, at Civic Ventures, our theory of change is this, that the problem in human societies is largely a consequence of the gap between technological innovation and civic innovation. Right? The problem is not technological innovation. The problem is keeping up civically, politically, and socially with that technological innovation. And that's what we devote ourselves to, and why we want to be both supportive of the technological innovation and hardcore about the social, civic, and political innovation that is necessary to keep the society sort of in balance.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Let's see. I think we have time for one last question back there.
Oh my gosh. Is that Ray Aspiri?
It looks like it.
Good morning, Nick.
Uh-oh, now you're in trouble.
How are you, buddy?
Well, I wanted to talk about, or have you reflect on, two examples. The Startup Nation on Israel, which is an amazing story about innovation, diversity from 63 countries, and how dynamic an economy they've created. The second one is in the Basque Country, with which I'm pretty familiar, where they use the concept of Mondragon, where each of the employees are owners. And in both those cases, their economy has been robust, and the people who participate in that economy also benefited directly. Example, in the Mondragon, you and I can't make more than 6 times the average salary of all of our fellow partners and employees.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I know a little about Israel, not the second case, but there just isn't any example in human societies where a programmatic, deliberate attempt to engage and include people in a robust way doesn't lead to goodness, right? It just now that is not to be confused with non-market communism, right? Communism is a different thing, which is like, hey, you're all kind of gun to the head included, right? To be clear, market economies, capitalism is the greatest social technology ever invented because it both permits and incentivizes the innovations that make better lives possible, and it both, it holds people to high standards, it gives people incentives, it ennobles the human spirit, and so on and so forth. But the amount of incentive or inequality in that system is a political and social decision, right? Like we need some inequality in our society, and every human society has always had some kind of inequality. There's never been an equal thing ever, right? It's ludicrous to think that you would, but the question is, how much economic inequality do you want? Do you want, like if the minimum, we took the minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour federally and $2.13 plus tips, would be $28 today if it had tracked the wages of the top 1%, right? So the question isn't, you just, and I would argue, I know this just people think I'm insane, but I would argue that if the minimum wage had tracked wages of the top 1%, if it was $28 today, we would have an unbelievably robust economy. I know, like, my Orthodox economist friends think I've lost my mind, but because such a thing is so, what do they call it, out of sample. You know, like, there's no example that they can point to where anybody in a human society has ever done that. But I'll bet you that if we did it, it would work out really, really well. Would we have some unemployment? Of course we would. But, you know, today, most of the money we spend as a society on poverty programs doesn't go to people without jobs, it goes to people with jobs who work for giant corporations and make oodles of money. And so, you know, I think Ray's point is, like, you know, there are these examples where people are really deliberately try to balance things, and they tend to work super well. And you know, I think as a society we should face that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned people think you're insane. Forbes magazine said you were insane.
Yes.
Real quickly, because we're running out of time, how are you doing in talking with your fellow capitalists, your fellow investor class? Are you convincing people? Are other people following some of your lead? How's that going?
I mean, when I first started talking about economic inequality 10 years ago, or whatever it was, like, kind of hardcore about it, so my peer group, a lot of very affluent people in that group, were angry and defensive. That it was not, you know, I had some very difficult conversations with people, and it made me angry that they were angry, but, you know, when I reflect on it now, I think that their anger was valid, because these are good people, right? They're super nice people, thoughtful people, empathetic people, super smart, hardworking people, and they didn't set out to create inequality. They just, you know, like, they just did their thing and it worked out. and so they're like, well, you know, so when you first started talking about economic inequality, it felt like an attack, like that they did something wrong, and that's not true to say that they did something wrong. They were just doing their thing, you know, and you know, they didn't construct the rules. They just played by the rules that were given them mostly, and you know, none of them were personally involved in the, you know, carried interest loophole deduction, for instance. And so, although some of them benefited from it, anyway. But today, you know, I think you have to, you know, you practically have to drive all the way to Texas to find a rational, intelligent person who's affluent, who doesn't think that economic inequality is an issue that we have to confront. It gets harder when you start to talk about, like, what to do, because that involves trade-offs that people don't want to make, which I understand. But I think I used to get a lot of hate mail. I get far less today.
Okay,
So,
well, that's so progress, right?
It's better.
Nick, this has been amazing. I think this is probably the most interesting breakfast happening right now in the city of Seattle. I thank you for that. The conversation continues on civicskunkworks.com. And that's Nick's blog. You want to check that out. It's very, very interesting. And I just want to thank you again, Nick. Yeah. And before you leave the stage, I want to ask you to stay with us, because we have one last message that I think you're really going to find really important, and a follow-up to this discussion of diversity and innovation. So let's have a round of applause for Nick Hanauer. Thank you, Nick. You're unbelievable. And I'd like to introduce Mohi trustee Enrique Gonzalez.
Thank you very much, Leonard and Nick. My name is Enrique Gonzalez, and I'm on the Board of Trustees. I'm also with the Public Defender Association. And I'd like to say a few words in Spanish to start off. Para los niños trabajamos, porque los niños son los que saben amar, porque los niños son la esperanza del mundo. It is for the children that we work, for they are the ones who know how to love, for they are the hope of the world. That is a quote from José Martí, who was a Cuban poet and martyr who believed that the blossoming of a society was contingent on how its children were treated. And Nick makes some wonderful points about education, and he said, I wrote this down and I hope I got it right, Nick. Education breeds growth. We here at Mohi are committed to the education of our young people. We have programs and activities that continue to foster that sense of identity, that sense of history, and that sense of inclusion that Nick so eloquently spoke of. And so your gift, if you choose to be a part of our community financially, can help a classroom of students explore game-based programs aligned with learning standards. These are children who don't necessarily have access to some of the things that our great museum has, but we look for ways, creative ways, to bring them into the conversation and to the inclusion of our community. Your gift today can adopt a school in need through our scholarship programs. We bring children from around the state to get to know their history and to have a place in society. Your gift today can support our innovation classroom. We spoke this morning about innovation and how important it is for our economy. In no other way can we better ensure that our city, that our society thrives than supporting our young people and making sure that they have access to the resources of this great museum. And so we ask that you give generously. You have a card on your desk or on your table, looks like this. We ask that you take a look at it and that you consider a gift that is meaningful for you, but maybe that you stretch a little bit further, because as Nick was mentioning, it's when we think about how we can raise all of ourselves up that we really begin to thrive. And so we ask that you consider that you leave a meaningful gift and do what you can, but we know that a lot of what we do here in the museum goes to educating our young people. And I myself, having grown up in the Seattle area, truly feel like I have benefited from people who have educated me, who have helped develop me. And really it's about the cultivation, about the hearts and minds of our young people. And this is one of the most direct, most effective ways that you can do that this morning. And so we ask that you give generously. So thank you very much.